that's it. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8 or High Def Channel 1072. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, I must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Anyone doing that? No, I see none. No. All righty. Well, we're honored today to have Sarah Korjoff from the Cape Cod Commission here to present to us on the topic of referrals to the Cape Cod Commission by bodies such as ours, the Barnstable Historical Commission. Just read a quick bio for Sarah, which I wonder I would do. Sarah is a senior planner and historic preservation specialist with the Cape Cod Commission, regional planning and regulatory agency serving the 15 towns of Barnstable County. Ms. Korjoff is responsible for historic preservation initiatives and architectural design review. She coordinates production of the Commission's design manuals, such as Designing the Future to Honor the Past and Contextual Design on Cape Cod, as well as numerous reports focusing on historic resources and community character. Ms. Korjoff regularly gives presentations on Cape Cod architecture and history. She holds a bachelor's degree in history from Middlebury College and a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. Sarah, thank you so much for making time available to us today, and please take it away.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I was asked to talk specifically about sort of the Barnstable Historical Commission's interface with the Cape Cod Commission and your role in sometimes referring historic properties to us for review. At the end of that, I want to tag on just a few extra slides talking about some other regional historic preservation initiatives we're working on that might be of interest to you. And then we can have discussion and any questions that you all have. But with that, I think I'll start sharing my presentation. And let's see, make sure this. Can folks see the presentation clearly, the lead slide? Yeah, all right, great. Okay, so again, thanks for having me. So in talking about the Historical Commission's role in interfacing with the Cape Cod Commission, I always like to sort of start by reminding historic boards what, I'm having trouble advancing my slide. Let's see, whoops. Okay. Reminding them sort of what the key roles are for Historical Commission. So obviously we work with all 15 towns on Cape Cod, so we coordinate with all 15 of the historic boards. And you know, the main roles for historical commissions throughout the region are one, focusing on research and educational efforts related to historic resources in your community, providing public education. The other sort of really prominent role that historic boards on Cape Cod have is instituting the demolition delay bylaw and doing individual reviews related to that. And then the third really relates to reviewing projects for potential referral to the Cape Cod Commission. So I'm going to sort of come at this one part at a time. We have a document that we've produced that explains this, the process, but I want to give you a little bit of background information. So when the Cape Cod Commission was created in 1990 by an act of the state legislature, it included a long list of purposes and resources that it was designed to protect. And historic resources, cultural resources, archaeological resources are in that list. With the goal of protecting those resources, one of the things that the Cape Cod Commission does as a regulatory agency, in addition to a planning agency, is identify certain types of development that have to be reviewed by the Cape Cod Commission and would have to be approved in order to go forward. So one of the thresholds that was created that would automatically trigger Cape Cod Commission review is demolition of or substantial alteration of National Register properties. So that's a pretty uncommon review power to have, though the Cape Cod Commission is certainly not the only agency with that. In fact, the Martha's Vineyard Commission, when it was created a little earlier than the Cape Cod Commission was established, has that same review power of reviewing changes and demolitions to National Register properties. And there are some other regional agencies, mostly in the Northeast, who have a similar rule. But just with that said, there are properties that are listed individually on the National Register, and there are properties that are listed as part of a historic district that's on the National Register. Those properties within a historic district need to be considered contributing properties, so historically significant properties that contribute to the sort of importance of that historic district in order for them to be potentially subject to Cape Cod Commission review. And because it's complicated, we've identified that there was the need to review full-scale demolitions of National Register properties, but also substantial alterations. There's a lot of question about what would be defined as a substantial alteration. So it was determined very early on that we would rely on the town historic boards for help in deciding what makes a substantial alteration to a property. So we've laid out some sort of ground rules and some guidelines or guide rails, but we do rely on the historic boards for the town because they are much more familiar with these individual properties than the regional agency is, and we think working together we'll come up with the best solution of which projects should be reviewed. All right. So just a refresher of sort of the tools that we use to determine what might possibly be referred to the Cape Cod Commission. I'm sure you're familiar with National Register nomination forms. If you have an individually listed property, then the name is right on the cover page, which is what you see kind of on the left. But if you have a historic district, a very important piece of the National Register form is what's called the district data sheet. And that's what you see on the right with the red circles on it. So the district data sheet lists all of the different properties that are within the boundaries of that defined district. And it lists them by street address, includes a little bit of basic information in terms of historic name, estimated year of construction, architectural style, if that's obvious. But then the second to last column is very important for this process because it's where it identifies whether a building is contributing to the historic significance of the district or not contributing. And that's what you see there with the letter C/NC. That's either contributing or not contributing. So in this example, which is from a National Register Historic District in Sandwich, you can see that the top two properties are contributing to the district, but the third property down is not contributing. It was built in 2007, so it's outside of the period of significance to that, for that particular district. And so this is just a good way of checking it's only the contributing properties that we would be interested in possibly reviewing at the Cape Cod Commission level. So another place that we can go to find out about National Register eligibility and is our Form B historic inventory forms, which we can find on the Mass Historical Commission's website, their MACRIS site, and also I know the town Barnstable holds copies of historic inventory forms also. But one thing that you can see in more recently completed inventory forms in the MACRIS database is that often they will have what's called a National Register criteria statement attached to them. And that criteria statement could be filled out by a consultant who was doing the historic inventory forms for the town, or it could be filled out by a Mass Historical Commission staff person who was asked to give an opinion or a commentary on whether a particular inventoried property is eligible for the National Register. And so if you find one of these documents, you can see that the person who fills it out would check whether they think the property was potentially individually eligible for the National Register or potentially eligible as a contributing property in a historic district. And then they would fill out a brief narrative of which criteria for National Register eligibility are met and why they think it's met, just in a paragraph or two. So that kind of information gives us some better background for historic properties that might not be listed on the National Register, but that are significant enough that they've been recognized by professional consultants or potentially by Mass Historical Commission staff that they are eligible, so we know understand their significance there. But now let's get into the process, really. So here's on the right, you can see the cover. This is a document we produced about 5 years ago called Referring Historic Properties to the Cape Cod Commission for Review, and it's really meant to be guidance for town historic boards. It goes into a great deal of, it has a good amount of detail in it. You can find this on our website, and hopefully you'll find it. This was produced after we had been using this process for a good maybe 20 years. So hopefully we tried to make it answer the questions that had come up along the way in that time frame. So starting with the introduction, sort of what are the purposes of having the Cape Cod Commission potentially get involved in reviewing some National Register properties? Well, the goal really was to fill in a gap in protection of our historic and cultural resources. So we all know that most of the towns on the Cape have some local historic districts that have the ability and the power to review and either deny or approve changes to historic properties. We also know we have an awful lot of National Register listed properties that are outside of those local districts. And up until the creation of the Cape Cod Commission Act, really they had almost no protection. They were only protected officially from state and federal actions. So if it was a highway improvement project or if there was some kind of federally funded project, then it would undergo some level of state or federal review. But otherwise, these properties, which had been evaluated and determined to meet, these high levels of significance, were not protected. So that was the intention in creating this review power for the Cape Cod Commission. But we also didn't want to go too far. We didn't want to become more powerful than the local historic boards that were reviewing local historic districts. We wanted to find something kind of that was in the middle. And so we decided to only address major changes, that being full-scale demolition of National Register properties or substantial alterations of National Register properties. And I will get into substantial alteration in a little more detail. I think I just want to make sure I caught this center bullet though, which is this is only to address changes to National Register properties that are outside of local historic districts. Because obviously, if they're in a local historic district, they already have an agency that's reviewing them, or specifically cultural resource protection issues. So jurisdiction, there's 2 ways that a project could be referred to the Cape Cod Commission. The first is mandatory referral, and that's where a project triggers that review threshold that I talked about a little bit earlier. That threshold of either full demolition of a National Register property or substantial alteration of a property. There are a couple of little caveats you need to know. The most important one is that for the entire Cape Cod Commission Act, there is a protection for single-family homes which says that the Cape Cod Commission cannot review a single-family home for any reason unless there's at least a 25% change in their gross floor area. So if you have a National Register historic property that's a single-family home, and they're proposing an alteration that only affects 5 or 10% of their gross floor area, it cannot be referred to the Cape Cod Commission. It does not. It might possibly be altering a very important part of the building, but because it's a single-family home and they have a special protection under the Cape Cod Commission Act, it could not be referred to the Cape Cod Commission. So that takes care of mandatory referrals. Discretionary referrals is a slightly different situation. So that's a case where a town can be concerned about historically significant buildings that are not on the National Register, but that they believe are significant enough that the Cape Cod Commission should review them. We have a tool, it's called the discretionary referral, where towns can refer something for our review, even if they don't trip one of our review thresholds. So in the case of cultural resources or historic buildings, a discretionary referral would be for a building that the town believes is historically significant and eligible for the National Register, but maybe not listed. And in that case, the town would make a discretionary referral and have to essentially make the case why they think the building is significant, historically significant, and why the Cape Cod Commission should review it. And then the Cape Cod Commission would then take a vote as to whether or not to apply its jurisdiction. In this case, there is another caveat, again, related to single-family homes, and that's that if we have a building that's not on the National Register and it's a single-family home, but the town wants to make the case for Cape Cod Commission review, there has to be an opinion by Mass Historical Commission staff or the board of Mass Historical Commission that the property is eligible for the National Register. It can't be a private consultant that's made that determination. Again, this is all following along on the this sort of level of protection for single-family homes from review by the Cape Cod Commission. So what's the process for referring the action? So with National Register properties, again, this would be a mandatory referral if you find that that there's either a full demolition or a substantial alteration of the property. When there's a full demolition, it's pretty straightforward, and it's an easy determination, I think, for the Town Historic Board that the project would trigger Cape Cod Commission review. When it's an alteration of parts of the building, that's when there's a great deal more judgment and evaluation that needs to go into the decision. And in those cases, in many times, the town has asked for commission staff to give an advisory opinion. And we're happy to do that if the town thinks that would be helpful to their deliberations. Some towns have staff that can provide advisory opinions. They have expertise in cultural resources. Some towns actually hire a preservation consultant to be sort of on retainer for when they have specific cases that they want to have additional advisory assistance for. And then towns that, I guess a third option is for towns who don't have that support system in place and want to refer to the Cape Cod Commission and ask for an advisory opinion to help with their decision making. So you can request an advisory opinion, it's not required certainly, and then once you determine though that it is a substantial alteration, then it's a mandatory referral to the Cape Cod Commission. And in the town of Barnstable, that referral gets made typically by the town manager or the building commissioner, but obviously the vote is going to happen in your board with the Barnstable Historical Commission. So for properties that aren't on the National Register, in this, where you're talking about buildings that aren't otherwise protected from demolition, it's really going to happen in coordination with your demolition delay bylaw. So chances are you're going to find out about the demolition procedure that way. Presumably it's a significant enough building that you will institute or impose the demolition delay. And then during that time period, you can decide whether the building is significant enough that you think it should be referred to the Cape Cod Commission for review. So if it's National Register eligible, you can vote to refer it as a discretionary referral. And as I described, that would be a situation where the Cape Cod Commission would hear your opinion about why the building is significant and why the Commission should review it. And if they agree, then they'll accept the referral and then begin our review process. So now to get to, I think, what's the most complicated part of this, which is what constitutes a substantial alteration. So we've described in this document in a couple of narrative paragraphs what that entails, but then also tried to just give you a list of bullet points of what we believe constitutes a substantial alteration versus not, to help you along the way. So the primary items first to be considered in substantial alteration are demolition of the original or primary building mass. So as we know, many of our buildings have an original form. They've been added onto numerous times and altered in time, but almost always that original building form is sort of the key character defining, or a key character defining feature of the building. So to demolish that portion of the building would most certainly be determined a substantial alteration. Large-scale renovations also that remove the structural frame and key features of the building could be considered a substantial alteration. Additions to prominent building facades, like addition to the front, or if the side facades have a lot of architectural detailing, and an addition to those would completely either remove or destroy architectural detailing that's important to the building. Those could be considered substantial alterations. New construction that would dominate the building, so new construction that's larger or perhaps taller, more massive than the original historic structure, could be determined to be a substantial alteration because it takes away from the character of the original building. And in some cases, building relocation, if it significantly changes the relationship of the building to the street and to the neighboring properties. Let's see. So we've also identified some things that we do not think substantial alteration should include. And that includes additions to the rear or to the sides of the building that don't impact original architectural trim. We think about historically how buildings have grown and evolved over time. Many of them have multiple additions put out to the side or the rear. They tell more of the story of the evolution of the building. So we want to allow that kind of continuing evolution of historic properties and allow additions and alterations to be made to those areas that aren't sort of the key character defining features of the building. So we're differentiating that from, say, making a new addition to the front facade of a structure. Also changes to non-contributing properties. So a lot of times we'll have a National Register property that has a contributing historic building, like the primary residential building on the site. It might have several outbuildings. There might be a very important barn on the site, which is also considered contributing. And then there might be some other outbuildings that are either much more recent or that really don't have any character defining features, and they might be considered non-contributing. So any changes to those non-contributing buildings would not be considered a substantial alteration. We've also identified demolition of later additions that don't have historic significance. Those should not be a substantial alteration. Maintenance and repair is not a substantial alteration. And also activities that don't require a building permit. We don't have authority to review those, and so that would not be considered a substantial alteration. And the thing, I think the other thing it's important to mention when you're considering substantial alterations is substantial in this case is not necessarily the same as a measure of size. It's not a substantial size alteration necessarily. It could be substantial because it removes the most character defining feature of a building. And so, or it could be a change that's very significant in size, but it's completely directed towards, 1980s additions to the building that, are not important to the history of the structure. So it's really not meant to be sort of synonymous with the size or scale of the addition. It's more the impact on the character defining features and the most historically significant portions of the building. Let's see. So that's as much as I was going to cover for that process, and then I was going to walk through just a couple of other little historic preservation regional efforts we're involved in, but I think it might make sense to give folks a chance to ask any questions about the review by the Cape Cod Commission and a referral process first.
Thank you, Sarah. Do any of the commissioners or any of our attendees have any particular questions that came to mind as they were listening to the presentation? If so, if you would raise your hand in a way that I or some of us can see and recognize, we'll be happy to have you speak and see if we can get there with that. Anybody got anything?
Actually, I got a question.
Sure.
So with the 25% gross floor area for referring for substantial alteration, is that only considering the historic structure itself and taking away from that 25%, or adding on to the structure as well with new additions?
Good question. I had that. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, and that's good. That's a question that we have had in the past. So it's actually defined in more detail in the document, but the fact is that it measures the gross floor area of the entire structure as it stands on the date that you receive the application. So that would be the historic building and any later additions that it may have. And it can be both removal of 25% of that gross floor area. So it could be removal of 25% of the floor area of historic structure, or it could be an additional 25%. So it's a 25% change either way. Yeah, and I should say it could also be, there could be removal of some portions that are proposed and then addition of other portions or additions to other parts of the building. And so it's not the sum total of the gross floor area change, it's the amount of change to the building. So it could be either removal or addition. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I had sort of a follow-along question, and it was in the context of a moving of a building, which is mentioned in the text that you elucidated, Sarah. And is that considered part of the percentage of alteration? I mean, if a building's being picked up and moved, that's like 100% of the gross floor area that's being moved. I don't know that that's probably what the intent is it? Or is it?
I would interpret it that way. So I guess that hasn't come up too many times.
Right.
But the fact is, it's an alteration of the, whatever portion of the structure is being moved. So I think
it has to be substantial, in my opinion. I mean, that's where I would go with it, but I'm just curious for your expertise. It sounds like you agree. Okay.
Yeah, and it's only come up in a handful of projects I can think of, including one in Osterville, like early on in our review process. So.
Yeah, there was a barn that was moved in Osterville, I know, a long time ago. I know that's probably not the same thing, but buildings get moved some distances or they get moved short distances for more practical reasons, and it's a toss-up as to what's really going on.
Right.
Other commissioners, other questions? I have one other, but I want to give everybody a chance. I was wondering about the historic context and the nature of an alteration or a proposed partial demolition being substantial in the context of how the resultant proposed thing will fit in the context of a National Register District neighborhood. And are there any thresholds or defining features that help a commission such as ours know when we've reached a point like that or when we have not?
So I guess we've focused on the individual applications. So obviously that's part of the consideration when you're thinking about any additions or alterations made to an individual property, whether they're, we're not just, we're primarily looking at how any of those changes would impact the existing historic resource. But if it's part of a district, obviously that district is all resources too. So the additions or alterations to a building could potentially have impacts on the surrounding properties that are also contributing parts to the district. I would say that in most cases when we've looked at, when we've reviewed properties within National Register districts where they're surrounded by other historic properties, that the same issues of concern that relate to the changes to that, the building itself, and how it will impact the historic property on that site, there, those same issues end up being carried to a lot of the neighboring properties. So I can't really think of a case right off the top of my head where it was a property that they felt was okay in terms of its impacts to the existing historic property on the site, but that they were concerned about the impacts it was having on the adjacent properties. They seem to have gone hand in hand in almost every case.
So it'd be more apt to be all or nothing, both entities of concern or neither than just one.
I think so.
Certainly just in context, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, it's worth mentioning that there have been a few cases where the addition that's being proposed has been like a large parking lot on the property. And so when you have, say, a property that's listed on the National Register and some of its key character defining features are actually landscape elements or open land, then that issue of possibly inserting a large parking lot into the site could be an issue of substantial alteration.
Right. I like that it's possible to reach out to the commission for an advisory opinion. I'm glad you led with that. I would not ever choose or hope to abuse it, but I think I can imagine occasions where that would be very comforting for a commission to have a preliminary opinion officially from you guys that would help us reach a conclusion. This kind of makes sense.
Sure. Well, the town of Barnstable has done that quite a bit over the years, actually. So, depending on the board makeup and, whether they felt confident or not to make that decision. There have been periods where I think in my time at the commission where Barnstable has forwarded every demolition proposal, for an opinion, and there have been other periods where they've just forwarded ones where they felt that they were very complicated proposals and they wanted some assistance sorting through all the changes.
Got it. Thank you.
So, a question about that?
Sure.
So, that being said, the home that we looked at on Old Stage Road, could the demolition, I understand it's not on the National Register, but with discretion, could it have been sent to the Cape Cod Commission for review?
I don't think Sarah's probably directly familiar with the property, but it was not within the National Register district.
That's what I said, right?
Yeah, it was, nor was it listed individually. It was, however, noted in a fairly recent inventory as potentially, a contributing structure should the adjacent National Register district be expanded in the future. So it was considered to be potentially contributing. So Barbara's question's a good one.
Yeah, well, so, and unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the building in question, but is it a single-family home?
Yes.
Okay.
And it
So,
was to be a full demolition rather than a partial, so.
right. So because it's a single-family home, not on the National Register, in order for you to make a referral to the commission, it would have had to have been determined by Mass Historical Commission staff to have been eligible for the National Register. So it's possible that existed if there was one of those criteria statement forms, appended to the inventory for that property. But I'm not sure if that was the case.
In that particular instance, we made a point of arranging site visits for the commissioners to go and physically see the building. And among our conclusions was that there was not as much of the original structure there as we had thought or initially hoped, just from the windshield survey perspective. And we were a little disappointed about that. And I think that was a pivotal part of our determination to allow the demolition to proceed. And we didn't feel we could comment much on what would come next, even though we were tempted to want to very much, because once we've approved a demolition, we can't really say much about what comes next, not in a district that we have any control over. But we were able to express our opinion at the time, just because we had the audience of the owners and others interested in the neighborhood, to say we hoped that they would use the conversations we had had as an instructive lesson towards what a goal would be that would be worthy of the neighborhood, which they had stated as an objective of their own. And, you know, that's about all we can do. I think it may be the extreme end of what we can do, but I feel like we did all right with that.
Thanks, Bob.
Any other questions for Sarah? This in particular? No?
No, I don't know if you could tell sort of from the content of the presentation, but I think it's worth noting that the Cape Cod Commission, in doing this kind of review for the last 30 some odd years, has found that it's most successful when referrals to the Cape Cod Commission are saved for those, you know, more significant properties, the more dramatic, you know, demolition proposals, things like that. And I think it's meant to really give boards such as your own an additional power that you can use when you really deem it appropriate, and it's probably most effective and strongest when you save it for sort of those most significant demolitions, or for when particularly significant buildings in your community are threatened with major changes and such. We have a couple towns in the Cape that have referred quite a few projects to us over the years, and then a bunch of other towns that have just referred one or two over the years. And so we recognize completely that towns have and town boards have you know, different levels of comfort with making referrals to the Cape Cod Commission, but and there's room for, you know, variety from one town to the next. But I do think that this is a tool that's best used sort of for special situations where it is a more significant property that's threatened.
Sure, that makes very good sense. Great. Well, thank you. It's, what time have we got here?
You want me, I'd be happy to run through the other slides I have, but if you have other issues that you need to cover, then that's totally fine too.
I would be happy to kind of split the time we have between now and about 10 minutes of 4 when we want to take a break before the next hearing, between anything you might have you'd like additionally to share, Sarah, and a bit of a conversation with Corey regarding the CLG, Certified Local Government Status, potential for our commission, because that has come up. I brought it up during a presentation last summer. I did so with the intention of pursuing it with some vigor, and then realized that we were sadly in the midst of having lost 3 of our fellow commissioners all in 1 year, and we were very short. And I didn't want to be burdening the commission or staff with extra work to try and pull that together at a time until we were ready for it. I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I'd like us to have a chance to just talk through what is involved, what the timeline might be should we initiate it, and what the obligations will be to sustain it after the fact. And I'm sure that both of you know what a lot of those things are, and I may know some of them, but I would like to hear it, you know, from a voice of authority to some degree, and have the other commissioners and those who are not able to attend today hear it as well by recording. So if you have like a 5 or 10 minute set of stuff you'd like to share first, that'd be fine. Do you think that's enough time for you, Corey, for the CLG, if we leave another 5 or 10 after that?
I was gonna say I could do it in 2 and leave more time for the CLG discussion. How about that?
That would be awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
So so this is sort of the landing page, if you will, for the Cape Cod Commission website. If you go there, you can look under Our Work, which is shown just to the right of our logo. And if you click on that, you'll see a drop-down menu of all the different resources we address, and historic preservation is one of those listed. And if you were to click on that, you would find a link to the document that I just presented to you, but also to a lot of other information. And just one of the things that we maintain at the Commission is a website with great data called Data Cape Cod. It's updated regularly. We do everything from census data to pond water quality data to economic data to historic data. And just you can, we have these data stories, including one that talks about the different time periods of inventoried buildings, inventoried historic buildings across the Cape. And you can see Barnstable's bar chart on the left is the tallest. You have the greatest number of inventoried historic properties of our 15 towns. And you can get a sense of the different time periods based on the different colors that you're shown. So that's a kind of just an interesting thing to know, that we have this data in case you're ever looking for backup for decisions you're making. We also maintain an inventory of buildings in the floodplain. This was an analysis we did a couple of years ago. Here you can see Barnstable again on the far left. Has a significant number of buildings in the floodplain, though not as many as Falmouth, Provincetown, and Truro, just by way of comparison across the region. But having this data really opened our eyes to the need for design guidelines, or flood area design guidelines for Cape Cod, which was a project we put together just a couple of years ago. And this isn't just for historic properties, but it does take them into account quite a bit. It's a document that looks at strategies from changes you could make to buildings that are in flood hazard areas to changes you can make to sites to better protect buildings. And as you can see on the bottom of this page, it includes sections that are special considerations for historic structures. And just a couple of pages from the document, everything from dry flood proofing, which is essentially creating a barrier wall in the building that would prevent the entrance of flood waters. This is a historic property in Harwich where they created a concrete barrier in the bottom couple of feet of the building to create a flood barrier, and then covered it over with more traditional materials to hide that. But also, we have a lot of communities where elevating buildings is really going to be the only option in some of the flood zones. So we do have a number of illustrations of elevating buildings to different heights and what some of the key issues are if it's a historic structure that's happening to, and how to preserve the key architectural details, how to differentiate between old and new construction and things like that. And then the last thing I wanted to just bring your attention to is something we released just in the last month or so called Elevating Underrepresented Histories. And it's a story map on a website essentially that is meant to bring together information about Cape Cod's less told stories, the less told history. And this is really part of an effort that's been nationwide in the historic preservation field. So here, if you visit this website, we've identified 5 different initial themes that we're highlighting. So this is highlighting research that's already been done about both Cape Verdean populations, Native Americans, Black, LGBTQ, and women's history in the region. And you can look at it in some total, like this, where they're kind of color-coded, and you can see places to visit that have information about these historic themes. Or you can pick an individual theme, like this one on Black history, and sort of see where the sites are that tell those stories. And along the left, you can sort of scroll through the list of stories that we have. You can select a single story from that list, and then read through the detailed narrative that's been compiled to tell that story. And this one, the Reverse Freedom Rides, many of you may know, but I thought it was appropriate since it's linked to the school administration site building right next to the Barnstable Town Hall, since that was where the buses originally came. But anyway, there's some really fascinating stories. We had a lot of fun working with a lot of different organizations and individuals gathering this information, and it is meant to be a website that will continue to grow and evolve. So if you know anyone who'd like to suggest a site, you can see on the toolbar on the top, on the far right, it says suggest a site. You can actually send us information, and we will pursue getting new properties on there as time goes by. And that is all for today from me. So thanks for letting me go through those.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's wonderful. I really appreciate it. I know we all do. I had seen the link to your continuing stories, or underreported stories, website, and I know one of my reactions was to steer you, and I want to steer others to the Cape Cod Maritime Museum, where one of their exhibits is specializing in women, sort of, I think it's called Against the Wind or something like that, and people who've made some rather astonishing accomplishments in their lives against the odds, and some of them may turn out to be qualified for your inclusion on that website. I would think that might be the case.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please feel free to stick around. You may want to, weigh in on this CLG conversation too. You're entirely welcome to. Corey, can I just sort of turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about what you reported to me back in the summer when we were first discussing the CLG status for Barnstable? I know you mentioned in particular that it's doable, but a little trickier in Barnstable because we have 2 additional boards or commissions to take into account in coordinating a result of that type, and one of them is the Hyannis Harbor Waterfront District, and the other is the Old Kings Highway. But if it's a good thing to do, I would think it's doable, and maybe we should start at least putting a plan in place if we don't start implementing it right away, so that it won't take us as long to get there once we feel comfortable going in that direction.
Sure. I mean, it is doable. There's been a lot of legwork already done
Right.
prior to my being in Barnstable. It's really just sifting through the files and looking at the report that was created and the work that has been done prior to me being here, and also Erica, and seeing what needs to be completed and what actions need to be taken. Not completely equipped to talk specifically about it right now, just due to workload in other areas, but I definitely, within the next couple of weeks could really sit down, me and Erica, and work out what we have available in the files here and what needs to get done. I mean, this does need to be approved by town council. So we need to work on that and get, coordination between the other 3 boards in town, the other 2 boards, sorry, and work towards getting the report complete. But I mean, Barnstable meets, really all the requirements in order to apply. So yeah, it just will take some, staff time and focus, and I can't see myself doing that for another, week to 2 weeks.
Well, that's fine. I will share with the other people in the audience here and others who may see the recording of this, that one of the reasons this is coming up again now is not just because I think we're up to full troop strength. Frankly, we're not. We're still down 1 commissioner and 1 alternate, but working on that, working on recruiting. But one of the town councilors reached out to me and said that a property that she represents has encountered a potential kind of catch-22 funding situation where it's not literally on town property and it's a leasehold interest in its existence, and it may not fully qualify for some of the types of funding that normally a town-owned property could for matching funds. For instance, if we went, or they go to our CPC and they get a grant, would they be able to get another match from another source? Well, the theory is maybe they would not qualify for that because of the ownership status of the real estate. And I don't know the intricacies of this, but it was suggested that having CLG status might open up either more volume from a given source or more sources to apply to. And that's certainly a very attractive concept among other reasons. But in the future, CLG status would give us better access to funding for training activity, professional training, also for funding inventory work, which, although it was nice to see, we had the tallest pile of inventory buildings on the Cape of the 15 towns in Sarah's slide. We all know that every year another class of buildings is becoming eligible for survey, eligible for demolition delay consideration, and surely not all of them will be up to, being preserved by us, but they all deserve due consideration, and the best way for them to get that is to be identified up front. So I see those as 2 kind of compelling reasons to move on as time permits and get it going. And maybe we'll be lucky. Maybe we'll suddenly have a full complement of commissioners about the same time that we, can begin to engage with this thing in a more meaningful way. But thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does open up some more funding. I think 10% of funding from MHC's prioritized the CLG communities.
Right.
It's not guaranteed. I worked in the CLG community prior to this, and it took 2 or 3 times to get funding for a planning project. So it's denied a couple times. It doesn't guarantee funding up front. You know, it just depends on what MHC will approve at the time.
And I don't think it does anything for projects that are like MPPF projects that are run through the Mass Historical Commission. I think those are just open. Claire, you could probably help us with that one. Open competitive grant application processes, and you get judged on your own merits. I don't think CLG status from the community that is sponsoring it is a credible advantage then. Does that sound right?
I think that's correct. Yeah, I honestly think that the CLG funding focus, or the percent that Corey mentioned, is really just for the Mass Historical Commission's inventory and planning projects. That 10% is guaranteed to go to CLG. So beyond that, I think one benefit of being CLG status is your board is given a little more authority and sort of credibility in any decisions they make about what's significant and not, because you're known to have sort of, I guess, the right range of tools, historic preservation tools, to be better informed.
Sure.
But I'm not sure that it will open many other funding doors for you,
Okay.
Which is not to say that it's not worthwhile by any means.
I get it. That makes sense, what you're saying. I came a little bit close to this subject years ago with this same commission, oddly enough at a time when I wasn't on the commission, but just because I knew a number of commissioners at the time. Nancy Shoemaker, you may have been a commissioner back when this was, discussed on 1 or 2 prior occasions. And in that context and time, I recall that the CVs or resumes of the individual commissioners and what their experience levels were was germane in the consideration by MHC about whether to grant the status. And I don't know how we stand up to that presently, or if we should be custom shopping for a new commissioner. I mean, I feel lucky when people are willing to serve at the moment, and people are doing a wonderful job doing that. But if we need to sharpen our level of group expertise in some way, that would be some important guidance to have, sooner than later, just generically. So if we're trying to recruit someone, we get someone who'd be qualifying us better rather than the opposite.
If I could comment on that, when I was initially checking in with MHC, a few months back, or actually it was, I think, in July now.
Yeah, it was last summer.
Jennifer at MHC, Jennifer Doherty,
Yep.
She had stated that, looking at the commission makeup and looking for a good group of professionals. Everybody doesn't have to be an architect or a landscape architect or a lawyer, but just people generally interested in with the knowledge of historic resources in town.
Mm-hmm.
So really not applying a very high bar to hit.
Okay, good.
But certainly people interested and passionate about historic preservation.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else have questions about this subject for Corey or Sarah? Nancy, any questions? Any thoughts? You look like you're about to raise your hand, so I picked on you.
No, I wasn't,
Sorry.
but it's 3:54, so.
I know. I think we should probably, no, you're right. I think we should call it and have our break, and we'll see some or all of you back again in just a few minutes for the 4 o'clock Zoom, which, by the way, just to repeat, is a separate Zoom entry. You need to go back to Erica's original email or the agenda and pick it from that to re-enter. And of course, everybody's welcome. Sarah, thank you again very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Corey
Good
and
luck,
Erica,
everyone.
thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.